if you are not focused on democracy and holding the line there, anything else you're doing is just busy work.
That's Dana Johnson, and that line stopped me cold. Because the obvious next question is, okay, then what isn't busy work? What actually moves something right now? Welcome back to the Campaign Strategist, where we dig into the art and science of campaigns with the people who build and run them, how they think, how they plan, how they win. I'm your host, Pete Altman. Dana has spent her whole career chasing a version of that question. She's a movement strategist and the founder of Strategic Movement Collective, where she helps organizations line up their strategy, operations, and advocacy to advance justice and equity. Before that, she was Senior Director of Strategy and Federal Policy at We Act for Environmental Justice, running national advocacy on clean air, water, energy, and climate campaigns. She also sits on the board of Green 2.0, which seeks to make the environmental movement more diverse. One thing really stood out as we talked. Almost everything Dana believes about strategy comes back to one idea, that connection beats isolation, not as a feel-good thing, not as a tactic. The campaigns that hold up, the movements that survive real pressure, even your own way of building a plan, they all run on who you pull in and who's missing from the room. Now, if this is the kind of conversation you find useful, do me a favor and like, share, and subscribe. It genuinely helps more people to find the show. And drop a comment while you're at it. I read them. Now, Dana and I covered a lot of ground, so let's get into it. You went from communications to leading large organizations and then federal advocacy, and now advising clients more broadly. Has that sort of journey and those lots of different roles been helpful in shaping your understanding of what drives change?
Yeah, so I think that the through line in all of the work was really to know your audience, understand your audience. So if you're trying to get, a groundswell of energy around the approval of a drug, for example, or people to adopt into making sure that they, have up-to-date home safety equipment, or even to get a member of Congress to pass legislation that benefits your community. It's really like being intimate with the audience and understanding what motivates them and really targeting your strategy and all the things that support it in a meaningful way. So I felt like that part of probably some of who I am, but also the training that came through academics and their work experience probably made it easy for me to adapt that kind of thinking to whatever work I'm doing.
That's really amazing because knowing your audience and how to talk to that audience and thinking in terms of audience, is particularly how so much politics works today. It's really audience's influence. How do you approach designing campaigns? Do you have a process? Because that's, of course, one of the points of the podcast is to share, hey, how do different people go about doing this? So I just wanted to hear, how do you tackle it when, a client or an organization comes to you and says, we want to get to this, help.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really great question. And I think a part of that is probably something that's innate, but I do try to, go back to what I said at the start of the podcast. What's the big guy objective here? And then I probably come down a layer and I think about how do I get to that? And there are oftentimes multiple strategies for doing that. And I try to think about the audiences, to power map toward who's primary in this strategy. And if we say all of them, then I'm going down another layer and I'm thinking about the tactics related to it, or maybe I'm even paring it down. I would say I do have difficulty paring things down because I could just see it all and I want to do it all. But I'm usually best served by somebody outside of me saying, we need to pare this down.
Yeah.
So being in connection and relationship with other people can be really, really important for me in that regard. And then I started to think about like the vehicles for how do we get there and who's the best messenger? Am I the best messenger? So then I'm probably going to talk to people, and I'm probably starting to early sale. So I'm trying to enroll other people in like this vision and taking into account what people are saying back to me. So they're probably either co-signing it, like, yes, go forth and do great, or people are like, hey, maybe you need to think about this. And then that part about enrolling other people is important because probably another area is I like to do it. I'm going to get in there and do it, but I'm probably in some instances not the best person to do it.
Yeah.
And so it's trying to bring people into the vision. And I'm probably also thinking about how do I approach this in a way that other people aren't. So like, what's the gap in this space?
Yeah.
And so when I was at We Act, and We Act for Environmental Justice, and we were talking about the models, for example, related to the Inflation Reduction Act and the greenhouse gas emissions, the carbon emission reductions. And I kept feeling like this is such an incomplete conversation. Like the gap that we need is how do we go down levels? So how do we look at regions and we look at states? Can we look at communities? And so it was like, we need a researcher on our team. So we ended up hiring someone who could have that like peer-to-peer conversation with other researchers. And I should say something in the most ineloquent way that I would say it, and have them translate it so that we could, so that we could start looking at like other criteria of pollutants and how do we think about the cumulative impact of being exposed to pollution, or the cumulative effect of particular policy pathway. And so, I'm probably trying to think about what's missing from this conversation, who's missing, and how can we get them in there. So that's probably my process.
That's
it's going to go
great.
like this.
Yeah, because if you need
and
to
then like this. Yeah. So it's like it's hierarchy this way, and then it's going to go this way.
This Trump regime has been waging against BIPOC-led organizations. I mean, people of color in general, environmental justice organizations. They've been stripping funding. They have been wielding the power of the federal government against these kinds of organizations. What's your take on how is that affecting these communities?
Yeah, I think we are in an extremely tough time. And so, as you mentioned, you and I have worked in the federal space. So we are up close and intimate with, what we see happening with congressional Republicans in terms of going after community groups as well as this administration. And I think one thing, it has certainly made it a lot more difficult to be able to engage and enroll community groups, community-based organizations in federal advocacy and federal work. I think people are a lot more cautious. So they're, sign-in letters are one of those tried and true tools that we use at the federal level around issues where we want to have Congress take a particular action, and people are a lot more cautious about signing on to things. People are a lot more cautious about coming to Washington, D.C. for lobby days. I think that people don't approach the executive branch of the government. I myself, in this new, since the inauguration, I have not engaged with any agencies or departments because they don't feel like safe spaces. And if we still have people that we know in those places, you think a lot about how will my engagement perhaps make that person vulnerable in their work. And so I think it has, caused us to really slow down and be cautious in what we do. I will say one benefit of it that I think goes back to the conversation we were having around social media is it is really required that we pick up the phone more and have conversations with each other. So probably even a little less on Zoom, but actually making phone calls and talking to people and sending less emails. And so perhaps the positive part of this is that it is pushing us more toward reigniting or redeveloping those one-on-one connections and relationships that we have with one another. And I think it probably is, the last thing I'll say is, and you made mention of this, the funding that was coming into organizations for work. And so you had EJ organizations, like I've talked to people in Louisiana and people in California who may have had like an EPA grant, for example, that dates back years, way before we had the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And people saw those grants even be revoked in this kind of process. And so I think it probably is impacting the financial stability of the environmental justice movement. And so people are also, holding that. How do they preserve the work that they're doing? How do they preserve their teams? How do you ensure that people are able to be paid? And so it's an interesting moment, but you also, I think, see organizations, if you have environmental justice in your name, there's no way you can fly under the radar. And so I think some people are even, digging in that regard, because really what do we have to lose?
Yeah.
So,
And hard to change your name away from what your particular mission is.
Yeah, exactly.
Have other NGOs been showing up for and showing solidarity?
I feel like as a whole, especially here in Washington, D.C., I think there was a wholesale kind of retreating and people sort of turning inward organizationally, probably as a protective mechanism, but also as people tried to figure out what they would do next. And I think that you do see some continued relationship and partnership on issues, and probably if we moved down a couple of levels in organizations. So you have maybe like your mid-manager level staff continuing to engage with environmental justice communities, especially if that's where their work has been centered for a while. I think you do see some of the larger organizations that have a legal focus or a legal apparatus still partnering with organizations to file suits to push back on Trump administrative actions. But I do feel like there was a wholesale retreat within the environmental movement in DC.
The instinct to duck and cover when in this kind of situation is, I think it's very understandable, but also they're just the wrong answer. This studies of authoritarianism make it very clear that it's actually really important for organizations to increase their connections with others and to act in solidarity so that you're not letting a few get picked off early on.
But I don't want to cut you off, but I feel like in larger society, we miss the opportunity to be in solidarity with one another. So if you look at the administration focusing on the legal community, focusing on higher education, focus on international aid. We have the opportunity as a society to, and that's what I meant about that focus on individualism. I'm going to save my individual firm, or I'm going to save my individual academic institution or, environmental organization. Just insert the name, as opposed to thinking about how we could all stand together and be a line of resistance. And so I think we missed the mark in a large way across the board. I even think I'm going to add the other branches of government to that list as well. And so
we missed
the mark. We missed the mark. I really feel like Congress, if you are not focused on democracy and holding the line there, anything else you're doing is just busy work. Your focus, heart in the paint, should be around how do we preserve the democracy? How do we protect our citizens? How do we protect our environmental laws and statutes? We can always make things better, but we needed to have a line that we all stood at, holding hands and, whatever. And I think we just missed that as a larger society.
We haven't really confronted this before in this way. And in the before times, there was some entity that usually would come in and be like, whoa, hey, this is not cool. That used to be Congress or the courts or civic organizations. And that didn't happen this time. And we're like looking around and going, holy crap, the safety, the net is very thin, or actually not. There's really not as much of it as we used to think there was.
I feel moments of worry. So I'll say in the beginning of this administration, I was full of angst and anxiety and felt powerless. And right now, I think I'm in a neutral space. And I'm probably feeling like, I think I can use Virginia as an example with the ballot measure to redistrict, in the middle of a district turn. And there were two members of the state legislature who really pushed for a new map, right? Really pushed for that ballot measure. And I think if we see, or as I see, that kind of energy and effort at every level of government, even if we lose, I feel better about a fight that we actually got it, right? As opposed to just surrendering. It's what I love about what we saw in Minneapolis. It's what Mayor Chicago went. It's what I love when I see Mayor Johnson and the governor, pushing back. I think if I see moments of that, or efforts in that way across this country to really push back. Can we beat cheaters? I don't know, but we should at least be in the game.
Yeah. Well, we have to. I think we really have to.
We don't have a choice.
But I also, even the worst times give rise to moments of real grace and courage. And actions that we can look up to. And I think the Minneapolitans lit the way for many of us in how fiercely they resisted ICE. And I recently, I don't remember if it was on a podcast or read about one of the reasons that they were so organized and able to, deploy themselves, and they had communication systems set up, was because in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, so many people in Minneapolis came together for protests, and they started to develop these networks and, again, connections and relationships and built trust. And that literally became infrastructure that made a tremendous difference when ICE came to town. And so, it's sort of like the breathing exercise. It's important to take those kinds of moments of inspiration and positivity and try to ingest, breathe them in as well.
Breathe them in. And I also think for as much as we want to have immediate relief, we probably won't. And so it does give us time to build those kinds of infrastructures across the country. And, we get to look at even Hungary, for example, what we saw happen with that election, where people decided enough is enough. And so if we have that infrastructure in place, we can build that groundswell of energy that we need to really have the kind of democracy that includes everyone. I mean, that's what America was, right? Wasn't it? Well, in theory, it was... At times, right. A place where everyone could come or could be and create a meaningful life for themselves. And we've had ugly moments along the way. But I think as a country, we were most poised to do that. And I still think we are. For as much as there seems to be roadblocks being set up to it, it'll be difficult to stop this country from being a multiracial democracy. It just will. And so we can roll into it together, or, what we see now, this tug of war for what was, and I think in some ways the fantasy of what was as opposed to all that we can be. Let's choose all that we can be.
So if Democrats take back the House or the whole of Congress, what would your campaign plan be for what should the environmental justice and environmental communities try to prioritize or get them to prioritize? What do we need to start working on?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that have been coming up for me. I feel like, especially last year, just pockets of people everywhere thinking about how do you rebuild an agency, for example, or how do we restore the implementation of a particular policy. And what was always missing, again, like that gap, I didn't see community-based constellations in those conversations. And so
what do you mean by that?
I mean, the people who are most close to the work that an EPA does, for example, where was the environmental justice? And maybe it happened and I don't know about it. That could be. But was there, or do we need to have the environmental justice constellation of folks
Got it.
thinking about a policy? So, and how did it work? And how would we change the way it works? And that's probably kind of late work, but I do think making sure people are in a space thinking about policies and thinking about agencies is really important. Wow. And you have me thinking about a campaign. Here's what I'm also going to say, and I might be rambling a little bit, but I have really been sitting with like our environmental laws. And I remember when I first came into the work, Monique Hardin was with the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice and called me and was like, are you sitting down somewhere? Because I need to talk to you. And I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? And she was like, I want you to really understand how the Clean Air Act works. Like, it's built on a premise of harm. And these are the ways that it harms people. This is what a lack of enforcement looks like. And just gave me a breakdown. And so I think that kind of work to think about how do we rebuild would be the place that I would start. And I think sort of envisioning what does ideal society look like? And how would you rebuild like federal infrastructure to meet that ideal society? So maybe we don't even build the EPA the way it was before. And like, who do we lead? And what are the accountabilities that we can build into those processes? And then we, start working with Congress to figure out how to craft our laws to meet the next 15 years. Right, that's what I would start. And, that work could very well be being done already. I know I don't know if you were familiar with the work that the former people who were a part of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council have been doing, traveling around the country and convening conversations with communities. And so I think some of that is that visioning work.
Oh, good.
Right? But then thinking about how you take that vision and develop it for the next 50 years, operationalize it, I think is what I'm headed to, is where I would start. And as I say it, yes, but doesn't it feel like it's too late? Like we should be doing it already, so that as soon as the switch nuts me, like, here, this is what we want.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you just said the members of the advisory group have already started going around. Well, you mentioned one of the challenges that I think is really, really interesting. What comes after Trump? How do we, I'm trying to think about how to phrase it. How do we get back to a set of laws and entities that can enforce those laws that protect people's health from environmental threats and harms? And I think that's a big question. Can we rebuild what we had, or do we need to build something new? And my feeling, and I've talked to a lot of people who, echo or have the same view, is, what we had was okay, but it was also part of what got us to this point, because it failed it still failed a lot of people in a lot of ways. And so we should think more forward looking about what is next? What is the shape of things to come? Which I think is a really a fascinating opportunity. It's sort of like, how do you grow something from the ashes? And can you make it more powerful and more effective and meet the needs better than what was there before?
Yeah.
But I'm not aware of how much of the conversation is happening. So that's why I was encouraged by at least the example you offered.
Yeah, I think people are thinking about it. But to your point, I do wonder how much of it is thinking about it in the previous context, and how do we adopt or adapt ideas that people have to fit into the previous construct. And I think we probably, as a nation, the next set of leaders will be so important, because we probably will have to have a both and strategy. So we'll have to maybe leverage previous frameworks and rules while we also work to build and to create something new. And I do think historically, industry probably has been prioritized in how we think about things, how we think about laws and their applications, and who we consider experts. And I think even how we think about the work, I think it's about us in BC a lot right now. So yeah, I'm thinking a lot about us in Washington, D.C. and how we think about this work, because I do think sometimes it is an intellectual exercise, right? Like it's like theory that doesn't always have the benefit of practice and real life and community. And I think that's part of the work too, to sort of like, how can we flip that approach to how we rebuild the country?
What gives you hope? Is it about the future? Or how do you create hope in yourself? Is it thinking about that opportunity to, how do we rebuild, or where does it come from for you?
I think right now it's probably coming from people like really not being in isolation. But like even this conversation has you like, I'm like, oh, how would I rebuild? Like it's energizing me. And so I do think being in connection with people really means a lot. And then seeing people like rally around one another and be in community with one another is really giving me a lot of hope right now. Like we are all just, buying a bunch of toilet paper and filling up our freezers and just waiting for whatever the end is. Like, we still trying to live and moving back toward connection. Yeah. And that's driving me. I will say, I'm going to go back to it. I think for as painful as this past year and a half or so has been, I do think the benefit of it is pushing us all toward one another in some meaningful ways.
Yeah. I think that's right.
Yeah.
Acts of love and humanity and compassion.
Yeah. Yes.
Really stand out. And it gets us thinking more about the importance of that in these kinds of times.
Right. Yeah. I agree.
So what's some advice that you'd like to pass on to young people or people early in their careers who are thinking about, hey, what can I do to shape the world around me?
So I think that you can come from a variety of background and interest and academic pursuits and contribute to something great. I think, again, I'm speaking through the lens of being in Washington, D.C. Like, right, we have a lot of environmental health and environmental science and legal experts. But if you are an artist or, someone who is interested in finance, if you are a teacher, like there are so many ways to get at the kind of society that we want to see. I want people of all kinds of backgrounds to be contributing their thinking and their expertise and their ideas, their creativity to whatever it is that we create next. So that'd be my first piece of advice. The table is open and set, and everybody come and have a seat. The second is around like how we care for ourselves. And I do think being in balance is important because this is the long haul. And so taking those moments to breathe, I'm always going to come back to the breath, taking those moments to go outside for a walk, feeding ourselves well, however you define that. I think those things are really important. And then the final thing we talked about a lot is being in community. So be sure that you don't do this in isolation.
That's great. I love it.
Thanks.
Dana, thank you so much. This has been so fun, lovely conversation to have with you.
I know. I was just thinking this was lovely. So thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for tuning into the Campaign Strategist, where we dive into the art and science of advocacy. The podcast is produced by Prismatic Strategies to share wisdom and insights from leaders in the field. I'm your host, Pete Altman. Music was written by Andrea Perry and Pete Altman, and this is edited by Abby Altman. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others who care about making a difference. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again, and see you next time.